After a bitterly fought campaign and days of uncertainty, Joe Biden is tonight President-elect of the United States. The race was finally called after the Democrat clinched the battleground of Pennsylvania. He delivered his acceptance speech from his home state of Delaware, telling the world it's time for America to heal and pledging to restore the soul of his nation's democracy.
I pledge to be a president who seeks not to divide, but unify, who doesn't see red states and blue states, only sees the United States.
His running mate, Kamala Harris, has made history too. She becomes the first woman and the first person of colour to be elected to the office of Vice President. Despite no formal concession from Donald Trump, our Prime Minister has joined other world leaders in congratulating Joe Biden on his election victory. Our correspondents are in some of the key battlegrounds tonight, but we'll start with Michael Rowland in Washington, D.C.
Good evening. Joe Biden has been declared the winner, but with the incumbent digging in, there is tremendous uncertainty about just what happens next. When the race was called, celebrations erupted across the country. There were tears of joy, dancing in the streets and fireworks over the big cities. US Bureau Chief David Lipson joins me now. David, good evening. A US election like no other. The President-elect faces no shortage of challenges.
Absolutely right, Michael. This was an election campaign that won't be forgotten anytime soon, an election count for the ages indeed. Joe Biden, of course, declared President-elect, but he inherits a nation at war with itself, losing the battle against the coronavirus and also trying to recover from the worst economic shock since the Great Depression. There's also a large portion of Americans who truly believe that this election has been stolen before their eyes, and they will be more disenfranchised than they were when they turned to Donald Trump in 2016. So Joe Biden, no surprise that he's talking about healing and cooperation. Actually achieving it will be a different matter because he does have, it seems, a hostile Senate to deal with. Getting through his cabinet alone may prove a challenge, let alone his election agenda.
David, thank you. We'll come back to you a bit later on. As we heard earlier, Pennsylvania proved to be the crucial state getting Joe Biden to that magic target of 270 electoral college votes. The President-elect delivered his acceptance speech to the honking of car horns. North America correspondent Catherine Diss was there.
And it is now my great honor to introduce the President-elect of the United States of America, Joe Biden.
After days of inching ahead, a final dash across the finish line and onto the helm of American democracy.
Tonight, we're seeing all over this nation, all cities and all parts of the country, indeed across the world, an outpouring of joy, of hope, renewed faith in tomorrow. Bring a better day. And I'm humbled by the trust and confidence you've placed in me.
As people filled the city's streets from east coast to west, Joe Biden's victory was met with a flood of emotion.
It's over! This is one of the happiest days of my life.
A moment that also meant the end of the Trump era.
It's easier to tell your kids character matters. It matters. Telling the truth matters. Being a good person matters.
We did it. We did it, Joe. You're going to be the next president of the United States.
And the election of Kamala Harris as vice president, a pioneering achievement.
While I may be the first woman in this office, I will not be the last. Because every little girl watching tonight sees that this is a country of possibilities.
This country owes women of color an crazy amount of gratitude for this moment.
Well, this is where the race has been decided, here in Philadelphia, the birthplace of American democracy, putting to bed days of uncertainty over the result and handing Joe Biden the presidency. Not only is this crowd ecstatic, there's also an overwhelming sense of relief. They know who will be their next leader.
But a bitterly contested election has exposed deep divisions.
For all those of you who voted for President Trump, I understand the disappointment tonight. I've lost a couple times myself, but now let's give each other a chance.
Biden's going to change the world, the country, and you know what? This guy, he's already lost.
Even as people celebrated across the country, coronavirus infections in the US are hitting global daily highs.
On Monday, I will name a group of leading scientists and experts to help take the Biden-Harris COVID plan and convert it into an action blueprint that will start on January the 20th.
Joe Biden's victory came on the very day he was elected to the Senate 48 years ago.
The energy here in Joe Biden's home state is electric. The sea of support as far as the eye can see. They've come out to witness their man's climb to the top, a political ascent almost 5 decades in the making.
It's clear for many, a Joe Biden presidency promises a new day for America.
Let us be the nation that we know we can be.
And Catherine Diss joins us now from Philadelphia. Catherine, good evening. As we have seen, scenes of jubilation right across the country, including there in Philadelphia, the biggest city in that decisive state.
Yeah, well, Michael, it was really quite something to be a part of today. There was this almost spontaneous eruption of jubilation and joy here on the streets of Philadelphia today when it was confirmed that Joe Biden would become the 46th president of the United States. The crowds have since dispersed, but they spent a number of hours on the streets celebrating here. And for that moment in history to be decided here in Philadelphia is really quite something. This is the birthplace of American democracy. This is where the nation was founded. This is where the Constitution was written. So for that decisive moment of history to be recorded here, to be decided here, is really quite something. The people of Philadelphia say that this is a win for democracy, and the people have spoken.
And you're at Joe Biden's acceptance speech. What more did we hear from him?
Well, the overall theme and message from tonight, Michael, was that a unifying one, that he would be a president for all of America, not half of the country, that he would work with both sides of the political aisle to get stuff done. But not only that, he also spoke about the path that he would take to achieving that. He warned it would not be an easy task stitching the fabric of this nation back together, but that he was committed to working with all races, colours and creeds to achieving that. And he said that his number one task would be tackling the coronavirus pandemic, announcing a panel of advisors for a coronavirus task force on Monday. Overall, the theme from tonight, Michael, is he's certainly not wasting any time from stepping into those shoes of the presidency.
OK, Catherine Diss in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, thank you so much. So that's the scene in the birthplace of US democracy, and America's institutions were subjected to the most ultimate stress test this week during the slow and uncertain count. With a look at how Joe Biden got across the line, here's election analyst Casey Briggs.
It took nearly 4 days, but in the end, President-elect Joe Biden can claim a comfortable victory. It's not the 2008 Obama-style landslide some Democrats were daring to hope for, but despite it feeling like a nail-biter, the result isn't that close. The delay in the result is just because of the huge increase in postal votes, rules for counting them in states like Pennsylvania, and the huge partisan divide in the methods people were voting by. Joe Biden's cleared 270 Electoral College votes. He has a viable path to 306, and the latter is the same number Donald Trump won 4 years ago. The difference is that Biden has won the popular vote by 4 million votes and counting. and he's won key Rust Belt states by bigger margins than Donald Trump achieved. Pennsylvania pushed him over the threshold, handing him the keys to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue from January next year. That race was called near simultaneously by US networks after the margin exceeded 0.5 percentage point. That's the threshold for a recount in the state. As well as Pennsylvania, he's flipped Michigan and Wisconsin, as well as Arizona, although the margin there is still tightening on further counting. There's more counting as well to come in North Carolina and Alaska. They're awaiting more postal votes, but Donald Trump has the edge in those states. And Georgia is still set for a recount, but Joe Biden pulled a little bit further ahead today in further counting. And while the Democrats have the White House, they've had a more mediocre result in other races, including in the Senate. The balance of power there won't be settled until 2 runoff elections in Georgia in January. If the Democrats don't win, the incoming president may find his agenda, his cabinet picks and his Supreme Court nominations being blocked.
Election analyst Casey Briggs there. Well, Joe Biden made absolutely no mention of Donald Trump in his acceptance speech. Number 45 is digging his heels in, continuing to make unproven claims of electoral fraud and insisting the race is far from over. Here's our chief foreign correspondent, Philip Williams.
Donald Trump was doing what he loves when news broke the presidential race was swinging in a different direction.
Thank you, Mr. President!
Now the loser, but not showing it, Mr. Trump posed for pictures with a bride-to-be.
Have a great life, right? Yeah! Young, beautiful youth.
Refusing to accept defeat, he retreated to the clubhouse to issue a statement. This election is far from over. Beginning Monday, our campaign will start prosecuting our case in court.
Well, the networks thought Biden was going to win by 10%. Gee, what happened? Come on, don't be ridiculous. Networks don't get to decide elections. Courts do.
The Trump campaign has launched nearly a dozen lawsuits in key battleground states. So far, 7 have been rejected. 3 have been taken to the Supreme Court. And Mr. Trump is seeking recounts in Georgia, Nevada, Arizona and Wisconsin.
Stop the steal! Stop the steal!
Trump's supporters took to the streets and state capitol buildings across the country to vent their fury.
Biden has not won the election. All of the legal ballots have not been counted. There's been multiple cases of voter fraud happening.
We love Trump!
One by one, they echoed unsubstantiated claims the election had been stolen by the Democrats.
We saw a coup being attempted in America.
While Mr. Biden won the popular vote, Donald Trump is focusing on his own historic moment, receiving the most ballots for a sitting president, more than 70 million.
If you let this down and don't fight, we're going to lose our freedom of this country.
In Washington, Biden supporters are getting ready to help the president out of the White House. The road ahead is narrowing for Mr. Trump as some Republicans keep their distance and others urge him to accept defeat. Barring a miracle, the reality star turned president may soon have to accept a message from the American people. He has just 73 days left in office.
Philip Williams reporting there. Well, Joe Biden inherits a nation in turmoil. One of the many flashpoints that have divided this nation are the continuing cries of racial injustice. Correspondent Greg Janet is on Black Lives Matter Plaza just outside the White House. Greg, good evening to you. Any ideas yet of how Joe Biden will address the concerns of Black America?
Well, with soothing words, first of all, Michael, and foremost among them is the word empathy. It was actually emblazoned on one of the big screens down at Wilmington, Delaware, when the President-elect spoke a little earlier, and a little bit of that is going an awful long way with the crowds who were here at Black Lives Matter Plaza, and there were hundreds, probably thousands of them earlier in the night in pure jubilation as they absorbed the news and invested their hope and their trust that Joe Biden can at least deliver some better outcomes in their lives than they're feeling that they've had to endure under the Trump presidency of the last 4 years.
And Greg, you've also spent some time in the Rust Belt. That proved critical to Trump's election 4 years ago, and now to Biden's as well. What did you find on the ground?
So neither Michigan nor Wisconsin necessarily won Joe Biden the White House, but they did create important stepping stones on his pathway to this place just behind me. It really was a story of how the Midwest was won as Democrats set their sights fully 4 years ago, Michael, on trying to get out the vote, which was so important in building what they call a blue wall for the Democrats through the Midwest.
Joe Biden may never realise it, but part of his pathway to the White House was paved right here.
I was going to the liquor stores. I was going to the gas station where people are. And I would gather everybody's attention in the liquor store. You can vote, no waiting.
Part Pentecostal pastor, part Democrat campaigner, Charles Ellis put the idea of a people's movement back into Michigan politics.
What time is it? It's time to vote.
In northwest Detroit, there'd been a loss of faith. Once rusted-on Democrats had given up on voting. Their jobs, connected in some way to the once labour-intensive auto industry, had long gone. The city's recovery was happening, but not out here, where money's tight and urban transformation never quite made it this far.
Now, these conditions in Michigan were matched in neighbouring Wisconsin and in Ohio too. Donald Trump had swept them all up 4 years ago, but Michigan only by a slender 11,000 votes. So the Democrats decided to play to their strengths, which are the cities, including Detroit. It simply meant finding the roughly 100,000 voters who'd vanished on Hillary Clinton 4 years ago. And it worked.
25-year-old suburban call centre worker Alana Williams-Baldwin didn't miss out this time, casting her first ever ballot for a US president.
I can definitely speak for Detroiters. I think that we're all like, okay, we matter, because we turned the whole state blue.
Turnout last week hit an all-time high for Michigan at 5.3 million people. Republicans, or at least the noisy ones, aren't giving up on Michigan just yet. All week they've stood outside the main absentee voting centre in downtown Detroit, arguing over alleged irregularities, guns at the ready. Jack O'Malley's a GOP state representative. He accepts the sun's setting on Donald Trump's political career.
I think his caustic personality turned some people off. I'm a Republican. There are a lot of reasonable Democrats out there. We've just got to bring this divisiveness down.
Red, white and blue working together for the common good. There's something millions in the Midwest may pray for when election 2020 has passed.
Correspondent Greg Jennett there. Well, with that wall rebuilt, Biden secured the presidency on his third tilt for the Oval Office. But what kind of administration will he lead? Here's our US Bureau Chief, David Lipson.
He became a senator at the tender age of 30.
Senator Biden, it's nice to have you here as the youngest member of the Senate.
A career in Washington spanned 5 decades, bookended by tragedy at home. Weeks after his first election victory, his wife and daughter were killed in a car crash. Then 5 years ago, he lost his son Beau to brain cancer.
The next president of the United States, Joe Biden.
Joe Biden's first bid for president was destroyed by a plagiarism scandal.
And it makes me angry. I'm angry with myself.
Then, 20 years on, his future boss beat him in the primaries. In 2020, it was third time lucky. Starting slow, his bid for Democratic nominee was resurrected by the African American vote.
That's why today I'm announcing my candidacy for President of the United States.
Having seized the nomination, Joe Biden cast himself as the steady, seasoned hand ready to heal the nation's divisions.
I'm running as a proud Democrat, but I will govern as an American president. No red states, no blue states, just the United States.
As Barack Obama's vice president, it was Joe Biden's job to get the healthcare plan, known as Obamacare, through Congress.
The best vice president America's ever had, Mr. Joe Biden.
want? Healthcare. When do we want it? Now.
And during his socially distanced campaign for president, the health of the nation became his first priority as well as the coronavirus tore through America. He's vowed to tackle the pandemic with free COVID testing, nationwide standards, and talked of a national mask mandate. Biden's instincts lie with global cooperation. He'd bring back conventional relations with allies after public clashes under President Trump. He'd likely attempt to revive the 2015 Iran nuclear deal after Donald Trump withdrew, and his promise to re-sign the Paris Climate Accord to help achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050. The US under Joe Biden would embrace the World Health Organization again and back in the United Nations. On China, the Trump-led hardline stance looks set to remain in place. The relationship with Australia should stay rock solid.
David Lipson reporting there, and David's with me again now. David, the key focus is now on Donald Trump. What his next move will be, does anybody know?
No one really has any clue with this president what he is going to do. Remember, this is a man who is not very good at losing. He's spent a lifetime essentially wriggling out of his responsibilities when he has lost, whether they be debts, taxes or invoices for contractors. And this is a huge loss. Remember, he's the first one-term president in more than a quarter of a century, so it'll be very tough for him.
And the challenge is on Joe Biden now to get that transition process underway as quickly as possible to, I guess, reassure the nation.
Yeah, and I think that's why Joe Biden is pushing forward with these plans for a coronavirus task force and trying to appear presidential at every turn. Will Donald Trump try to disrupt that? Yes, he will. We can probably bet that, although there are reports that his son-in-law and senior advisor Jared Kushner has already approached the president to indeed suggest that perhaps now is the time for him to concede for the good of the nation and for the good of his own legacy.
David Lipson, thank you. Well, that's it from the team here in Washington and our correspondents. As we have mentioned, great uncertainty continues. President Trump is refusing to concede. There is 2 months until Inauguration Day, and as we have discovered this year, when it comes to US politics, anything can happen.